Story 1. The Ginseng Poachers of Great Smoky Mountains. I grew up car camping all over Tennessee, but last fall was my first time taking my younger brother Jake and his fiancée Sarah on a real backpacking overnight. We did everything by the book: permit secured at Cosby Campground, car parked by the trailhead kiosk, route carefully planned up the Low Gap Trail along Cosby Creek to one of the designated backcountry sites. It was late October, that perfect window when morning frost makes footbridge boards slick as glass, but afternoon sun warms you enough to unzip your jacket on the climbs. The campground sat half empty, and the air carried that distinctive dry leaf smell you only get when keep colors have faded and trees are shedding their final defenses against winter. I wanted them to have a gentle introduction to backcountry camping, cook simple meals on the stove, fall asleep to creek sounds, experience how profoundly quiet the Smokies become once you walk more than a mile from any road. What I got instead was a night that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. About half a mile before reaching our designated campsite, my trekking pole caught on something I never saw coming. The pole flexed sideways with unusual resistance, and suddenly a thumb-sized brass bell gave one flat, ominous note that echoed through the forest. There it was, knee-high, almost invisible in the shadow between two saplings. Someone had strung monofilament fishing line and tied the bell to create a crude but effective alarm system. We crouched around it like we were examining a leak under a sink, all of us suddenly hyper-aware of how unnaturally still the woods had become. The line was too clean and deliberately placed to be old litter, too purposeful to be random. I carefully eased the bell off my pole and reset everything exactly as we'd found it, but my mind was already racing. Someone wanted advance warning of people moving through this area. 10 minutes later, we encountered the second trap, a dented coffee can filled with pebbles strung on more fishing line at shin height across a faint side trail. When Sarah asked what it was for, I mumbled something about maybe deterring deer because I didn't want to voice what I was actually thinking, that someone had set up an early warning system and was monitoring who came and went from this remote section of the trail. We stepped over carefully, reset the can as best we could, and continued hiking because the sun was already disappearing behind the ridge. We needed to make camp before full darkness hit. Our assigned site was one of the smaller, more secluded ones, a couple of flat sleeping pads carved into the hillside, a makeshift fire ring built from river stones, and a clean run of Cosby Creek about 30 yards downslope. We ignored the fire ring entirely, setting up our camp stove on a flat piece of mineral soil instead. I found a solid branch for hanging our food well away from the tents, and we filtered water from the creek. The air had that crisp, cold edge that makes aluminum cookpots ring like bells when you set them down. Our plan was simple: eat dinner, take a short walk to scout our exit route for morning, then zip ourselves into the tents by full dark. That's when we found the cache. Following what appeared to be a game trail behind our camp, we discovered a square of blue tarp tucked deep into a rhododendron thicket. The corners were weighted down with river rocks, and the whole setup was carefully camouflaged with leaf litter. Underneath, the soil was disturbed and mounded into 4 distinct lumps about the size of small loaves of bread. There was a burlap sack tied with paracord. I loosened the knot just enough to peek inside and immediately caught the sharp, green, medicinal smell of fresh ginseng roots. Knobby tan forms with delicate feeder hairs, dirt still clinging to them. My heart sank. Harvesting any plant material in the national park is strictly illegal, but people do it anyway because those roots can sell for serious money on the black market. We had stumbled onto someone's illegal ginseng harvest. We didn't touch anything else. We carefully replaced the sack, pulled the tarp back over, repositioned the rocks, and backed out of the thicket the same way we'd entered. There was a brief whispered conversation about whether we should pack up immediately and hike out, but darkness was already settling into the drainage. Between fallen leaves and scattered blowdowns, hiking out would mean slow, dangerous progress on slippery ground with only headlamps for guidance. I made the decision that probably saved our lives. We would follow strict backcountry protocol, have a careful night, and leave at first light. That meant keeping gear organized for quick departure. Boots lined up ready to step into, bear spray clipped where my right hand could find it without looking, headlamps with fresh batteries and strobe modes ready, camp stove on standby if we needed noise. We ate dinner without much conversation, and I kept glancing nervously back the way we'd come. Somewhere on the trail behind us came the single chime of a bell. Just one note, then absolute silence. If you've spent time in the backcountry, you learn to distinguish between animal sounds and human sounds. That bell chime was definitely human. Deliberate, controlled, purposeful. We killed the stove immediately and listened. The creek continued its steady murmur. Leaves ticked and rustled as the air cooled. But no voices, no footsteps, nothing to explain that single haunting bell note. We retreated to our tent early, boots lined up for instant access. True darkness fell like a curtain. Without moonlight, everything beyond our headlamp beams dissolved into the same impenetrable gray wall. Not because anything sinister lurked there, just because light only travels so far through dense brush and tree trunks. We were half asleep when we heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps on dry leaves. The careful pace someone uses when they're trying to move quietly but can't avoid making some noise. Then two voices started speaking to each other just outside the reach of our headlamps. A man's voice and a woman's voice, words pitched low and steady. Every time one of us called out, "Hello, can we help you?" the voices would completely silent, waiting until we stopped talking before resuming their conversation. They never let us catch a complete sentence, never revealed what they were discussing, but they were definitely coordinating something. We got out of the tent and executed our plan. Jake, Sarah, and I stood back to back in a defensive triangle, headlamps on low beam, but with fingers ready to switch to strobe mode. The camp stove roared to life, providing both noise and heat. I held bear spray in my right hand with the safety off, but my finger clear of the trigger. In the clearest voice I could manage, I announced that we were camping at a permitted site, that the campground host knew our planned itinerary, and that we would be leaving at first light to report everything we'd found to the rangers. The woman's voice called from somewhere on the trail. "Help! He's hurt!" The man's voice answered from a completely different angle with the exact same words. Same inflection, same timing, like an echo, but echoes don't work that way. They kept moving just outside the edge of our light, and every time we swept a headlamp beam toward the sound, the footsteps would shift by several yards. Leaves would crunch once or twice, then nothing. The coffee can we'd found earlier rattled gently, as if someone had shaken it with two fingers before letting it settle. When I swept my headlamp across the brush line, I caught a glint of new monofilament line. They had strung another trap while we were cooking dinner, closer to our campsite, between two short stakes hammed into the forest duff. The brass bell gave a tiny metallic tick, not a full ring, like it had tapped against something and been steadied by a human hand. I repeated that we were staying put. The woman called again with that same steady calmness, and the man echoed the identical words in the identical rhythm. We didn't move. The roaring camp stove drowned out my thundering heartbeat. I could feel Jake's shoulder pressing against mine harder than he probably realized. We got back in the tent only after the footsteps had been absent long enough to make standing in a defensive circle feel foolish. But we kept our boots on, headlamps around our necks, bear spray canisters between our knees. The nylon tent walls felt as thin as tissue in that bone-deep cold. We sat in tense silence for maybe 15 minutes. Then someone's breath moved the tent fabric directly behind my head, and a voice said quietly, "Not loud at all. You saw it." The tent zipper tugged halfway down before catching, as if whoever had grabbed it didn't understand how the slider needed to clear the storm flap. I hit the strobe button and yelled, and the entire tent interior strobed brilliant white. Whoever was there moved fast and low through the leaves, crashing away into the darkness. Immediately after, we heard the sharp twang of monofilament snapping near our vestibule. They had moved one of their alarm lines so close we could have tripped it just stepping outside. From down the trail came the woman's voice. "We're leaving." The man's voice from another angle said the exact same words in the exact same measured tone. We didn't respond. We sat there with headlamps off to conserve batteries, sweeping light every 10 minutes, trading watch shifts with nothing more than whispered, "Your turn." The temperature dropped to the kind of cold that makes tent flies stiff as cardboard. Story 2. The Lake Mary Encounter. I grew up in Arizona, and I'm not new to sleeping outdoors. My cousin Tyler and I have done easy overnight camping around Flagstaff for years. Ashert's Lake, Marshall Lake, quiet pull-offs along Lake Mary Road when we just want a peaceful night under stars and a quick drive home in the morning. We've heard all the normal sounds out there: elk bugles that carry like train whistles across the plateau, coyote choruses that start up suddenly and cut off just as abruptly, the steady wash of tire noise from distant highways when atmospheric conditions are right. Early October felt like perfect timing for a midweek camp. A cold front was forecast to push through overnight. Clear skies, dropping temperatures, crisp air. Upper Lake Mary was sitting flat and mirror still. We loaded Tyler's Tacoma with a 2-person tent, a cooler, a small bundle of firewood, and the old mag light my dad had kept under his truck seat for decades. We weren't chasing adventure or testing ourselves against nature. We wanted a simple evening fire, a quiet shoreline, and solid sleep before heading back to work responsibilities. We turned off Lake Mary Road onto a short cinder spur I'd used twice before without incident. The ground sits level there, scattered with juniper trees and patches of mountain grass, with a shallow wash that runs toward the water. The lake stretched out like a dark steel plate about 100 yards from our spot, calm enough to reflect the perfect curve of the far shore. We parked facing the tree line with the truck bed toward the water and set up our tent 20 feet away, positioning the vehicle to block some of the evening breeze. No other camps were visible across the cove, no lantern glow from other sites, nothing but day-old tire tracks and rabbit prints pressed into the volcanic cinder. By sunset, we had hot dogs roasting over a contained fire built inside a neat ring of basalt rocks. The cold front announced itself the way they always do up there. The air turned dry in a different way, sharper, and the breeze carried an edge. Sound began traveling farther. I could hear a truck engine on the highway that had to be several miles away. And when a bird shifted position in a nearby juniper, the rustle carried clearly enough to make me glance up. We talked quietly and didn't say much. It was one of those nights where every small noise seems to have clean edges, where you can feel how far each sound travels through the thin air. Around 10 o'clock, we doused the fire down to glowing coals and secured the cooler right beside the truck's rear passenger tire. We locked the vehicle out of habit. I remember pressing the key fob twice and seeing the hazard lights blink in confirmation. Tyler laughed at me for testing the door handle anyway, but we both do that reflexively, needing to feel the lock mechanism catch. The temperature kept dropping steadily. We brushed our teeth and got into the tent by 11, each of us with a headlamp looped around our necks and boots positioned for immediate access. We zipped the rainfly closed, and the world outside shifted from orange firelight to gray twilight to complete blackness. I could hear the lake more than see it, wind carrying water sounds the way a long hallway carries voices. I was drifting toward sleep when I heard my cousin speak from the trees near our truck. Not shouting, not far away, just using the tone he normally uses when he's trying not to wake anyone up. "Dave, bring the light." I rolled onto my elbow, and my first drowsy thought was that he'd gotten up to relieve himself and needed the mag light for some reason. Then Tyler exhaled hard beside me and bumped my shoulder because he was turning over in his sleeping bag. I felt the bag material move against my arm. He was right there next to me. I whispered, "You heard that?" He whispered back, "Yeah." We both listened intently. The wind worked our tent fly slightly, producing the familiar small metallic sounds you always get from aluminum poles in a cold snap. 30 seconds later, I heard a single click from the direction of the truck. Not a thud or rattle, the distinct sound of a door handle being tested, the characteristic noise of the metal latch touching and bouncing off because the electronic lock is engaged. It happened once, then weight shifted in the cinder gravel. If you've camped in that stuff, you know the sound. Shallow grit compressing under something heavy, followed by a pause like someone trying to decide where to place their next step. A lone coyote started calling from the far side of the lake, producing the clean, wild cry that comes from genuine distance. It was joined by another voice that didn't match the distance, much closer, but trying to mimic the first animal's pattern. Then something else attempted to follow the yipping rhythm without getting the spacing right. It came out like syllables arranged in wrong places, an almost but not quite imitation that made my scalp tighten. I don't scare easily, but something about that wrong timing hit me in a way that bypassed normal fear responses. I called out clearly, "Who's there?" because that seemed like the honest, appropriate thing to do. The coyote-like sound stopped mid-yip. The cutoff was so sudden and complete that I knew instantly it hadn't been a coyote anymore, if it ever had been. Footsteps padded away through the cinder, a few slow, careful steps, followed by a burst of movement that covered too much ground for the amount of sound it produced. We stayed in the tent for another minute, trying to breathe normally. I could hear Tyler swallow. We didn't call each other's names or ask stupid questions. We just said, "Okay," and "You good?" in low voices, then unzipped together. We kept our headlamps on the lowest setting and angled them toward the ground so we wouldn't create targets at chest height. The mag light stayed in my left hand with my thumb on the button, but I didn't activate it yet. The remaining coals in our fire ring provided just enough illumination to reveal outlines and shapes. There, beside our cooler, plain as a photograph, was a barefoot print pressed into the powdery cinder. It was longer and narrower than normal, and the toes were splayed in a way that my stomach dropped. It looked like someone had pressed down hard with the front of their foot to gain purchase for rapid movement. There was no shoe tread pattern, no clear heel impression behind the deep toe marks. The angle of the disturbed cinder pointed upwind toward the south side where juniper trees grew thicker, the direction our scent was being carried. Something moved at the edge of our firelight's reach. It crossed through the dim glow the way a person might if they didn't want to walk directly into illumination, but it didn't carry itself like a person. The shoulders sat wrong somehow. The height seemed off for level ground. The profile never offered us a clear view of what should have been a face. It glid between two low bushes and disappeared. I remember exactly how my mouth tasted. Dry from chewing tobacco I'd had earlier, now metallic like I'd bitten my lip. Tyler didn't say anything until he had to urinate. He stepped behind the truck bed, keeping the vehicle between himself and the tree line. I stayed positioned where I could see his boots at all times. From the far side of the truck bed, close enough to be whispered against skin, I heard my own voice say Tyler's nickname. "Ty, over here." He zipped up fast and said "Dave" in a way that was both question and warning. I was standing in full view, 5 steps to his right. He could see me clearly. He knew exactly where I was. My mouth said, "I'm right here," but it came out thinner than normal, strained. He backed around the bumper to me without turning away from the truck bed. We started watching the south side of our clearing intently. The wind was steady from that direction, carrying our scent toward the lake. Whatever was moving out there kept trying to stay upwind of us, not to catch our scent, but to prevent ours from reaching it. The realization hit both of us simultaneously. Whatever was out there didn't want our human smell near it. It wasn't avoiding our light so much as being extremely careful about scent trails. We kept our headlamps dim and moved in small steps until our backs touched the truck doors. I unlocked with the key fob, timing the electronic beeps between wind gusts because I didn't want to provide any additional audio landmarks. The world narrowed to the rectangle of windshield glass and the strip of juniper forest beyond it. About 30 feet out, something moved between tree trunks again, still refusing to present itself at a full angle. It maintained a generally person-like shape right up until we turned the ignition key and flipped the high beam switch. As soon as bright light cut across the area, it dropped to all fours. But not the way a person bends. There was no natural break at the waist, no knees folding the way human knees fold. It lowered itself in Story 3. The Fake Volunteer at Red River Gorge. I'm not the kind of person who goes looking for trouble. I'm from Louisville, late 20s, the type who packs rain gear even when the forecast says clear skies. My buddy Tyler is the checklist type. Bare cables properly rated, campsite numbers recorded, printed copies of regulations posted by the fee station. When we camp, he has everything covered. We like Red River Gorge because it's close and honest. Trails that climb just enough to make you work for the views. Sandstone arches that look like they've been holding up the sky since before humans walked upright. Mid-October, we reserved a weekend spot at Coomer Ridge Campground, planning to hike the Gray's Arch Loop at dawn and catch the formation through low morning fog. Rain had been falling steadily but never heavily, the kind that darkens leaves and keeps voices naturally low. The campground was maybe half full, with quiet hours posted from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It should have been a completely forgettable damp night in the woods. I'm telling you this story because it's not about ghosts or unexplained phenomena. It's about human predators, and like most of those situations, the warning signs were obvious once you knew what to look for. We rolled in during late afternoon and chose an outer loop near the bathhouse. The picnic table was already glossed with drizzle. We strung a blue tarp from the table's metal post to a nearby maple, keeping it angled low so water would run clean instead of pooling in the metal. Tyler built a small regulation fire for morale, just enough flame to see our hands and feel some warmth. We talked through morning plans, park at the Gray's Arch trailhead off Tunnel Ridge Road, walk the loop at a leisurely pace, be back by lunch. Nothing ambitious or complicated. We were scraping mud off our hiking boots when a man walked up like he had every right to be there. Brown canvas jacket, faded ball cap, worn work boots, and a cheap digital watch that looked like it came from a gas station blister pack. He had a red LED light clipped to his hat brim, not turned on yet. He opened the conversation with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and said he was a volunteer trail host making evening rounds, checking on who was hiking which routes. I've met legitimate volunteers before. They always display laminated ID badges, ask if you have questions about trail closures or regulations, provide phone numbers for emergencies. This man didn't do any of those things. Instead, he asked what specific route we planned to take tomorrow, what time we were leaving, whether we had spare AA or AAA batteries, if there was beer in our cooler, and if anyone else knew our exact itinerary. He kept positioning his body at slight angles to get better sight lines to our cooler latch. Tyler said politely that we were all set and had reviewed the posted regulations. The man didn't take the hint to leave. He asked about batteries again, like he hadn't heard himself the first time. When he finally stepped back, it wasn't with any normal, "have a good evening." He said, "see you around the loop," and headed toward campsites that appeared to be empty. We weren't heroes about it, just practical. We moved the cooler into the truck bed and secured it with a cable lock. The spare batteries went under the driver's seat. We added a second guy line to our tarp and tightened everything properly. We told each other he was probably just socially awkward, that rainy weather brings out people who don't have anywhere else to be. But I felt that familiar, tight sensation in my gut that tells you to sleep with your boots on. As darkness settled over the campground, that wet hush descended that you get when mist dampens everything. Not silence exactly, just all sounds muffled and padded. I woke sometime after midnight to a soft footstep in wet forest duff and a dim red glow bleeding around our tarp edge. The guy line on my side of the tarp drew tight once, then again. I told myself it was just material stretching from accumulated moisture, but the line tightened a third time with a sharp snap, and I heard the clean sound a knife blade makes when it does its job right. My side of the tent fabric pushed inward about an inch from what felt like a knee or hand, and a low voice said in perfectly even tones, "I know you're up." Not a threat you could repeat to a judge later, not shouting that would bring other campers running. Just a sentence meant for exactly 2 sets of ears. We didn't waste time discussing it. We moved with purpose. I palmed my keys, wallet, and headlamp, stepping out into the drizzle with my heart hammering like boot heels on a hollow log. Tyler emerged with the same 3 essentials in his jacket pockets. We kicked dirt onto the last glowing coals of our fire. The plan was simple. Reach the access road, walk straight to the host's RV near the campground entrance, knock on the door, and hand this problem over to someone authorized to call law enforcement. In the gravel lane, we stopped short. A beat-up sedan sat crosswise like a roadblock, hood propped open with a stick. One headlight was fogged from the inside, and the front bumper was held together with zip ties. The man in the brown jacket raised his palm like a traffic cop and said he needed a jump start for his car. He said it softly, the way people talk to dogs they want to approach them. We kept walking. When we moved to pass wide around his vehicle, he slid quickly into position and released a short burst of pepper spray at our feet. Not a full blast, just enough